we speak with our words, but we also speak with how we spend our money, right? When you spend money, that in a way, that's a form of speech, right? And so exercise that free speech. Choose to work with organizations that you know share your values, honor your values, where you know that your dollar isn't going to be used in a way that violates your conscience.
Welcome to the Christian Channel. I'm your host, Yanitza Munoz. Today, we are honored to have the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships of America's Christian Credit Union, Frank Clement. Thank you so very much for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I have a few questions for you involving banking. I'm learning myself, by the way. As a millennial, sometimes I feel like I should know more about my finances, so I'm really happy that you are here today. So tell me a little bit about the difference between Christian banking and other large banks.
Sure. Well, our organization, we do banking. Banking is the service that we provide, but we're a credit union. And I think in some ways, the fact that we're a credit union is what makes all the difference. And if I may, the difference between banks and credit unions is not always well understood by people. And so you'll see that banks and credit unions do a lot of the same work. They offer similar products, but the ownership structure is totally different. And so a bank is owned by shareholders, and those shareholders may or may not actually use that bank. They may not be customers, but they are interested in making sure that that bank makes as much money as it can, that it's as profitable as possible. A credit union, on the other hand, is a nonprofit cooperative, and so it's actually owned by the members. So when you join a credit union, and this is not just true of our credit union, this is true of any credit union, when you join, you are becoming a part owner of that organization, and there are no other owners besides the members themselves, which means then that financial institution doesn't have split loyalties, right? It's not trying to make a lot of money for the shareholders while also sort of keeping the customers happy enough to stick around. And so that's, broadly speaking, the difference between a credit union and a bank. But then when it comes to that faith element that you talked about, this idea of Christian banking, well, at America's Christian Credit Union and other organizations like ours, we exist to serve the financial needs of the Christian community. And so our focus is on helping people obey God, essentially, right? With their finances, we want to help people honor God, obey God, do what God is calling them to do, and making sure that they have the products and services they need to be successful in that calling.
And what I love about that is, when you do bank with a large bank, I'm not going to say names, you open a high yield savings account or a CD, and you put a large amount of money in there with a good return on interest that they might give you every quarter. They're using your money to invest in other stuff. Or maybe if you open a Roth IRA, they're using your money to invest in other stuff to help you, gain some type of more income because inflation is real within the next, 10, 20 years, et cetera. But with America's Christian Credit Union, I've noticed that you guys usually just invest in faith-based businesses or faith-based projects to really help the community. So instead of helping billionaires become more billionaires, you're helping the community within.
Yeah. Well, and some of these big banks are doing far worse things than just helping billionaires make more money. I mean, if that's all they were doing, I'd kind of be okay with it. But, to give a hypothetical situation, let's say that you're at home, you hear a knock on the door and you go, and there's someone wearing a Planned Parenthood t-shirt. And they say, hey, good news, we're building a new clinic right here in your neighborhood. Would you like to donate? I hope you would say no. I mean, I don't want to speak for anybody here, but I'm guessing that if you're watching the Christian channel, you would say, no, I don't want to donate to a Planned Parenthood clinic here in my neighborhood. Okay, so the person says, okay, fine. If you don't want to give money, will you at least lend me money? And I'll pay you back, what you lent me with interest, right? You'll make money on this. I would still hope that a lot of people would say, no, there are other ways to make money that don't violate my conscience, right? So then the question is, well, what's your bank doing with your money? Because there's about $17 trillion sitting in checking and savings accounts all across the country in banks that are large and small. And those banks, they're not just holding dollars in a vault. They take that money and they invest it somewhere. And if you don't know what they're investing that money in, there's a very good chance that they're investing your money in something that goes against your values. And sure, they're paying you some interest on your money and you can be happy about that. But the question is, how was that interest earned? What kind of an investment was made with your dollars that got you that return?
Yes, at what cost, right? Mm-hmm. And at the American Christian Credit Union, on your website, it also shows the different ways that people can be a part of your faith-based bank and how they can reinvest with you. You even have different rates on there as well. So I highly recommend for all of our viewers to go to the American Christian Credit Union's website, which we have here listed at the bottom of the screen. I also love that you guys have helped so many churches get back on their feet, maybe rebuild, do capital improvements, or even just build a church by scratch. Also, you help so many schools. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, and that's, maybe have you heard of this idea of debanking? Is this a word that you've come across?
Yes.
Okay, so I think this is coming to the public's consciousness. But we are seeing Christian organizations and Christian individuals who are being debanked. Their banks are saying, you're not a customer anymore, here's all your money back, see ya.
And they're just doing that because maybe they don't see value in the investment?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. And a lot of times it'll be couched in terms of risk. So they'll say, you're a nonprofit, you're faith-based, if you're a church, the money that you bring in that might be used to pay off a loan, let's say, is people who voluntarily show up every week and put money in a little basket, right? There's no contract, there's no accounts receivable, there's nothing the bank could draw on, if the giving practices change within that church. And so there are banks that will say, we don't really understand why you do church in the first place. Seems kind of strange, feels kind of risky, and isn't something that we necessarily want to be associated with. So they could take that risk perspective. And then there's also the reputation issue. They might say it's, if people found out that, this church or this parachurch ministry or this Christian school was banking with our institution, maybe that doesn't give us the street cred that we want among the people that we really care about. And so we'd rather cut you loose so that we can get more business over here. And so I think that's why it's so important then that there are financial institutions like America's Christian Credit Union that are sympathetic to faith-based organizations and say, we exist to serve you. We exist to help you grow. And so, for one of my favorite examples, there was a Christian school up in Oregon, because it's Oregon, they had some rain damage, and they had to replace the roof on their gym, and, pretty extensive project. And their contractor gave them some short-term financing. And they're like, great, we'll just do this. And then once we're done with the construction, we'll refinance it with our bank. So the project is done, and they go to their bank and they say, we need to refinance this loan. And their bank says no. So they go to another bank in town, get told no. They get told no 5 times by banks there in their town. And at this point, they're starting to wonder, will we even survive? Because the interest that we're paying on the financing we got from the contractor is killing us. Like it's such a high cost. And so they were trying to figure out, like, oh my gosh, what's the exit ramp then for this debacle that we're in? And then they found out about America's Christian Credit Union, and we worked with them, and we helped them get to a point where they had the financial strength to refinance that loan. And since then, they've doubled. So they now have double the students, double the campus size. They are meeting the needs in their town in a way that they never would have. I mean, they were seriously on the brink of closing completely, and now they've doubled. And so having a financial partner that sees value in what your ministry is doing or what your family is doing and saying, we want to support that, we want to give you access to credit to be able to grow, that's something that I think that people of faith are going to find harder and harder to come by. But when you do find a financial institution that sees value in what you're doing and wants to support it, hang on for dear life, because that's a partnership that's not easy to find.
I'm really happy that everyone at America's Christian Credit Union is doing God's work, because unfortunately, there's so many churches that need capital improvements, or even churches that want to be built and they're unable to, especially here in Southern California, where it's not easy to come across any new land, and then there's land leases, and then just even to improve a building probably is just more than $1 million, especially here in Southern California. And having America's Christian Credit Union is definitely helping people see the light at the end of the tunnel. Is there any testimonials you would like to share from families that maybe have any type of experience with having you guys save them through any hardships?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have about 2,500 from our adoption program in particular. So back in 2008, we had some families come to us and they said, we feel like God's calling us to adopt. We want to bring a child into our home, but it's $40,000 to do a private adoption. We don't have that kind of money. But if we, wait until we have that much money, we'll be 5 years older, won't have the energy. And plus, maybe in some cases, we've already met the child that we want to have placed in our home. So is there anything that you can do to help us as a financial institution? And so we took that feedback that we were getting from our members, and we went to the drawing board and we said, how can we help families that feel like God is calling them to adopt? I mean, what a beautiful thing for people to do. God adopts us as sons and daughters, and then for people here on earth to follow that example and do it for a child in need is such a beautiful thing. So then, we as America's Christian Credit Union, what's our role to play in that? And so we created an adoption financing program, and we were able to, make the interest rate really low, lower than most loans of that kind. And we also made it so that families could borrow just the amount that they needed as they went through that journey, because that process can take like 2 years in some cases. And so if you had to borrow, $40,000 on day one, but you don't need that money until maybe a year later, but you're already paying interest on it, right? And so we're not here to make a profit. We're here to help our members obey God's call. And so we did everything that we could to make it help the families bring that child into their home with the least impact on the family. And since then, we've done about 2,500 adoption loans since 2009 when we launched that program. And we have a whole board in our office of family photos. So when families have that child placed, they'll send us a picture. And the cards that we get, it's gotten so that, a lot of our loan officers, all they want to do is adoption loans because it's such a beautiful thing. It's like, well, we still have to do car loans. They're not nearly as interesting, but people realize that we are a partner there to help them do what God's called them to do. Again, for a lot of financial institutions that are not dialed into the needs of people of faith, why would they think about adoption, right? That's not something that a lot of people even think about or consider doing unless there's that call in their life. Like, God is telling me that I need to care for an orphan, right? That true religion that James talks about, caring for an orphan. And we're going to do it in a literal way.
That is beautiful to hear that you've saved over 200 people from, orphanages, in the sense of giving them a home, in the sense of helping these families financially, being able to adopt these people. From 2009 and onward, if you just do the math, somebody, let's say they were adopted at age 3, they're going into their adulthood now, and they have that love, that family. They are not in the system for the rest of their lives. Unfortunately, I've known some orphans, and they went into group homes, and then when they hit 18, they're kind of on the streets, and they don't have the same experience as you and I may have, where they just knock on a door during the holidays and have a parent. So it's beautiful that your team at America's Christian Credit Union is helping so many people. And also going back to the low interest rate, it just shows that you guys are really just trying to help the community. Also, it's beautiful that you guys offer with like student loan aids, student aid for people trying to go to school. I went to Loyola Marymount University, and I went to a faith-based university, a Catholic one that is, and I remember there was opportunities like that, and it just shows you that our community is strong, and we're here to help, not so much for profit, here to help. Sometimes people forget that. They assume, oh, well, why is it that a faith-based business exists? Well, you are going to spend money on a non-faith-based business. Right. Why don't you contribute and give back, or anything is something meaningful? So it just shows that you guys are doing God's work, and I hope anybody that's watching and listening sees the positiveness of this interview, because you guys are definitely here to serve the community. And aside from helping so many people being able to adopt, you also are doing a lot of other projects where you're able to help people save their money and help educate faith-based individuals. Sometimes the elderly, right? They're unable to understand where their money goes when they do invest with bigger banks. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we often will go out into the community, and we'll offer workshops. And lately we have worked with a few. There's some senior centers nearby that we go out and we visit, and we're talking exactly what you're saying. This is how you can make the most of your money. This is how you protect your money. And we talked a lot about scams. And financial scams are huge right now, and it's just constantly evolving. And especially now with AI and deep fakes, like it's harder than ever to tell. What's a genuine. Is this really my bank calling me, or is this a scammer who's trying to steal my money? And so making sure that our members are educated, they're receiving the information that they need to make good choices with their money. And I also, just to go back to something that you said a moment ago, of course we have people who come to us because they need to borrow money, and that's a big part of what we do. But I think a lot about people nowadays, here in the U.S., believers who say, how can I do more, right? How can I help fellow believers? And especially with inflation being what it is, there are a lot of people who are like, I can't afford to give more than, I give to my church, right? I tithe to my church, but I don't have anything extra to give to, the local mission, or I don't have anything to give to the people who are, doing wonderful work overseas. And I wish that there was a way for me to support fellow believers who are doing that kind of kingdom building work. Well, one of the most basic things that you could do is you could choose to bank with an organization like America's Christian Credit Union. And there are others. There are 140 faith-based credit unions all across the country, so this isn't just a plug for us. But when your money is parked at a Christian credit union, that money becomes available in the form of credit, in the form of loans to people who are doing kingdom work, right? And so you're getting comparable, you can get a high-yield savings account with us and get the same returns that you would get at Chase or Wells Fargo, sometimes better, but knowing that your money is then being put to use in kingdom building work. And I think about, in the book of Acts, how the Christians, that first century church, how it talks about them having everything in common, right? And I want to believe that more than just, they sold this extra stuff they didn't need and they shared with the people who were in need. But I would hope that, like Paul talks about this idea of, if you're not working, you shouldn't eat. So people were continuing to do business, right? If they built tents or they made sandals or whatever, they were still doing that. But when we as believers choose to do business with fellow believers, we're strengthening our community. And so when we choose to bank with fellow believers, it means then that loans are available to fellow believers. And, going back to COVID, for instance, there were several churches that they said, we feel that God has called us to continue meeting in person. And their, big bank caught wind of that and said, well, that sounds really dangerous. What if something bad happens? And you have a $2 million loan from us, and so we're going to go ahead and ask you to pay that loan back now because your risk profile has changed because you're meeting in person during COVID, right? And these churches, they're sort of on the horns of a dilemma because they're like, well, we don't have the $2 million to pay you back now. We can continue to pay you back on a monthly basis, but we don't have all the money in hand right now. That's why we got the loan in the first place. And now you're telling us that because we are obeying God, we are doing what Christians are called to do, which is to continue to meet and to worship, that all of a sudden, we are riskier than when you first met us, and now you want all your money back. So that's something like, I know that was 4 years ago now, but I don't want people to forget what happened, because if something like COVID happens again, look at your financial institution and ask yourself, do they have my back or not, right? Are they in my corner or not?
What's so interesting about that time in our history was that so many liquor stores were open with lines out the door. There were certain venues that were still open serving alcohol, and I'm sure whatever loans they had were still fine. Yeah. So I don't know if there's some type of conflict of interest, maybe different corporations just had better relationships with these banks, but it is very unfortunate that a place of worship was basically being shunned for having people look for God, getting faith. I mean, it was a time where suicide rates were up. People were very depressed. People were passing away. People needed God more than anything. But liquor stores were open, and marijuana shops, all these other things that were not good for you.
Right.
And were making it worse. If you did have depression, that is make things worse. So it's really unfortunate time in our history. So thank you for bringing light in that. And for anybody that's watching, take that into consideration with who you're banking with.
Yep. Well, and it also, it just shows, that was such a revealing time about how our culture really sees faith, right? They see it as, it's a hobby, right? So if it's safe to engage in your hobby, that's fine. But, if something changes like, a pandemic or whatever the case may be, well, then you should stop doing that because it's not worth it, right? The risk reward of worshiping God, no longer makes sense, right? Well, okay, that tells me everything I need to know about how you view my faith. You see my faith as optional. It's something that I can choose to practice or not practice. And again, I hope that we are not too quick to forget those lessons learned, and that we take steps to, I think, sort of harden the church a little bit, right? Come together. And this is why I love Christian Channel so much, right? Having all of this amazing faith-centered content so that people, it's not like I go to another big streaming giant, I won't say names, right? But every once in a while there might be a faith-based show, but what's it sandwiched in between, right? And where does it fall? And is that streaming platform even recommending it to me? Even if the algorithm knows that I'm a person of faith, is it serving me up that content, or do I have to go searching for it versus going to a platform that's like, no. All the content that someone who believes in God, here it is for you, right? And there's none of the garbage that you would see on these other streaming services, right? Just the good stuff so that you can come and your soul can be fed by beautiful stories about the faith.
And with American Christian Credit Union, do you guys offer support for small businesses? Now I've noticed since COVID, there's a lot more people coming to faith, and they'll have some type of faith-driven clothing, whether they'll have the Virgin Mary on it or crosses or Bible verses. Do you guys offer a lot of support to small business owners?
Yeah, so it's a beautiful thing. I mean, our credit union, like I said, there's 140 Christian credit unions across the country. Some of them can only serve people, in a certain county or at a certain state, but we can serve people all across the country. And we serve ministries, of course. We serve these faith-based nonprofits. We serve individuals who are part of those ministries, like a congregant of a church. But we also can serve those congregants who have a small business like you're talking about. And so if somebody has a for-profit business, but it's faith-oriented, we can absolutely serve them, and we can be their bank. We can help them with their operating accounts. If they're looking to secure some credit so that they can grow their business, that's something that we can in a lot of cases help them with. Obviously, standard underwriting applies. I don't want people to think that we just hand out money to anybody who asks. We want to be the financial partner that is supporting the growth of those kinds of businesses. Because again, we as Christians, sometimes I think we almost censor ourselves. We assume that what we have to say isn't welcome in the public square, so don't even say it. And I hope that people test that boundary a little bit, because it may not be as true as you think. It may be that you can come out and say what you believe, and you won't be censored. You won't be shut down, but you have to have the courage to come out and say it. And this is, Rod Dreher had the book Live Not by Lies, and he talks about how in all of these communist regimes throughout the 20th century, you kind of knew things were bad when the self-censoring started. When people started saying what they really thought, but they said it in hushed tones, right? So nobody would hear. I want to tell you, but I don't want anybody else to hear. And have we allowed ourselves as Christians here in America to kind of adopt that self-censorship? And if so, then we need to fight back against that. And I'd say part of that, we speak with our words, but we also speak with how we spend our money, right? When you spend money, that in a way, that's a form of speech, right? And so exercise that free speech. Choose to work with organizations that share your values, honor your values, where you know that your dollar isn't going to be used in a way that violates your conscience. And like you're talking about these clothing companies, wear that shirt, right? Wear that necklace. Be proud of your faith and let the world see what you believe in. Because we wear all kinds of logos all the time, right? It's like you wear Nike or Adidas and you don't think anything of it, but then like you said, maybe there's a T-shirt with the Virgin Mary on it, and you're like, well, I don't know if I should wear this. I don't want to offend people, or I don't want them to think I'm weird. Just wear it.
Beautiful, well said. And do you guys also offer support to the bilingual community?
Yes, yeah. So I think either a quarter or a third of our staff speak Spanish in addition to English, and so we serve people in English and Spanish. We have a couple of other languages represented, but not nearly as strongly. Again, this is Southern California, where
mostly Spanish is when it's bilingual, usually English or Spanish.
Sure, yeah. But no, we are excited to serve believers speaking English, speaking in Spanish, other languages. We would do our best to figure it out, because we want to be that resource for Christians all across the country.
Where do you see America's Christian Credit Union in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, a big hope on our part is that we'll hit $1 billion in assets. So we're at about $650 million. And this is in the banking world, everybody always wants to know, how many millions of dollars or billions of dollars you have in assets. Just for your context, Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, they're all over $1 trillion. And that's why, when you consider the strength of these financial institutions and, through that strength, the influence that they wield, I would say that's why, people of faith should take really seriously where they bank, because you are essentially lending strength to somebody who's wielding influence. And so the question, of course, is, well, how much influence do you want that particular organization and the people running it to have? And so, we're really hoping that we can grow our membership, we can grow our deposits, we can reach that mark of $1 billion. That's sort of a magic mark for a lot of financial institutions our size. But I'd say more importantly, like on the Christian schooling side, for instance, we want to see more students having access to Christian education. And that means that we need to have stronger Christian schools in communities all across the country. And a lot of these schools, they're strapped. It's really heartbreaking to see how hard the administrators and the teachers work in these Christian schools, and they do it for pay that's a lot of times not that great.
I've witnessed that myself. Yeah. I went to Rosary High School in Fullerton, all-girl Catholic school. And then I went to Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And I had professors that PhDs, very well educated, and they're not so much by the paycheck, because unfortunately they were hoping to get paid more, but because they really believed in the service that they were doing. And I think I got a great education. A lot of people did there as well. But at the end of the day, I feel that there is a need for more support for Christian education, for sure.
Yeah. And you know, what that looks like, you know, in one sense is when schools are financially strong, financially healthy, they have more aid to give. And so all of a sudden they can enroll more than just the families who can pay full price. They can also offer aid so that families who can't pay full price have access, and those children can come in. The other thing,
grants and scholarships, very much needed. Yes.
Yes, huge. And you know, the other thing is there. I don't know if you've kept up with this, but in a lot of states that aren't called California, they're moving toward these school choice programs where state funds that would have gone to the public schools are now going to the families, and the families can use those funds to pay for private school tuition. So there's now, I think, 32 states that offer some kind of school choice program. Again, I don't think California will ever be one of them, but now these schools are running into a new dilemma. So now the families can afford the tuition because they're getting the funds from the state. Yay, that's really exciting. But then the schools are like, we just converted our last broom closet. There's no more space. So even though we have a waiting list for virtually every grade that we offer, we can't accept more students until we expand our facility. And then they turn and they say, well, who would be willing to lend us money so that we can, you know, construct a new wing, a new academic building, so that we can bring these students in who so desperately want a Christian education here in our community. And so thinking about the capacity of our Christian schools, thinking about the capacity of our churches. And so when people, and you made the great point earlier that a lot of people through the trauma of COVID actually came to faith. And that's, you know, oh, happy fault, right? Like, even though it was a terrible time, it turned a lot of hearts to the Lord, and that's a beautiful thing. But then the question is like, well, is there a good church in their community where they can go and be fed spiritually? Is that church in good repair? Is that church able to accommodate all these people who are seeking truth, seeking the Lord? And so we as a financial institution, we want to help all of these ministries across the country build their capacity to be a light in their community. So we're not the ones evangelizing, we're not the ones educating, but we're the ones who provide the financial backing so that these Christian schools and these churches can do what God has called them to do. So I would say that at the end of the day, that's what we exist to do, is to strengthen these ministries and strengthen the families that they serve so that, like I said earlier, they can obey God and do what he is calling them to do.
And also, our youth is the future, right? So if there was more funding and grants specifically, because college tuition is very expensive in the United States, there was more grants, I think there'd be more people willing to feel comfortable applying to that university, because they would feel like there's money to be spent and they wouldn't have to be in so much debt from it.
And if I may, I sorry to cut you off, but if there are any church leaders out there, there was a time when church leaders took Christian education really seriously, and all the major denominations, you know, operated networks of K-12 and, you know, college schools, right? And a lot of parishes would have a school attached. And we've seen a lot of denominations pull back from that role and, you know, not offer the financial support, not offer the spiritual support either. You know, there was a time when the pastors of churches would also serve as the chaplains of those parish schools. And so I guess I would just encourage people out there, Christian education is extremely expensive, right? And not everybody can afford it. But I don't think God has called us to provide education only to the people who can afford it. We're supposed to provide Christian education
to everyone.
To everyone. And that means that the whole church has to come together. And it comes back to the same idea of, you know, wake up, church. Let's come together. Let's, you know, be like that first century church where they had everything in common, and be willing to share and to build up the capacity of our ministries so that those ministries can reach more people with the truth of the gospel. And so my prayer is that, you know, more people in the church will turn their focus toward building up the capacity of Christian education. Because like you said, the youth is our future. And if young people are being formed in their faith through their education, and they're not seeing faith and education as separate, but understand that, you know, if all truth is God's truth, then everything that we learn is a reflection of our Creator. And so as they grow in that academic development that's infused with faith, those are the people who are going to lead our churches in the future. Those are the ones who are going to go to seminary and become priests and pastors. Those are the ones who are going to attend church and have families and bring their children and raise their children in the faith. And so this is going to be a multi-generational project, and it requires some foresight, and it requires some changes in how we do business. And it means, choosing to give here rather than there, or it means doing business here rather than there in order to build up the capacity of the church here in America and around the world, so that we can shine the light of Christ in those communities where people so desperately need to hear truth.
Beautifully said. My next question is that for anyone who's watching and is considering opening an account with you, what advice would you give them to help them make a secure decision? For example, I know myself, when I switched from one big bank to the next, I have so many questions. Is it secure? Gosh, it's a hassle to move the money over. What advice do you give to our audience?
Yeah. Well, switching banking is absolutely inconvenient. There's no way to sugarcoat that. And in some ways, it's probably by design.
Now with technology, I feel like it's gotten a little easier. Maybe 10 years ago it was more of a hassle, and getting a cashier's check was like the only way to go, because you never wanted to grab the cash and go to the next bank,
right.
Look over your shoulder, make sure no one saw you doing that. But it still is a hassle, because you have to wire it and wait a few days, etc.
Well, and I would say in some ways technology's made it easier, but in some ways it's made it harder, because when you look at your checking account, let's say, how many automatic transactions do you have going, right? All of your subscriptions, all of your memberships, all of your right? It's all dialed in. And so, the biggest fear that I hear people talk about is, okay, if I open this new account and I move all my money over, and then I realize that, oh my gosh, I forgot to change where my mortgage gets paid out of, and then it gets pulled from my old account that, has insufficient funds, and I get slapped with a, $35 fee by my old bank, and then my mortgage lender is giving me trouble, so it's absolutely inconvenient. So I'm, again, not going to sugarcoat that, but I want to urge people to understand that it's worth it nonetheless. And there are so many things in life that are worth it, even though there is some difficulty involved. Now, to the security question, now that one I can say you can totally put your mind at ease when it comes to any Christian credit union, especially, America's Christian Credit Union. We are insured by the National Credit Union Administration. It's a federal entity. And so every depositor is getting $250,000 in federal insurance on their deposits. Plus, we actually pay for private insurance so that they get an extra $100,000 in insurance on top of that. So for all of our members are getting $350,000 in insurance. And so, if somebody somehow hacked into your account and stole your money, there's recourse for that. You're covered. You're safe. And then I guess the other related issue is access, right? And so our main headquarters are in Southern California, and we've got members in the middle of Alaska. We've got people all over the East Coast. And a lot of people say, well, if I bank with you rather than, the big national bank that has a, branch on every corner, how do I access my money? How do I actually do the banking? And, technology is our friend. We have amazing online banking. Most of the banking is just done on your phone at this point. And it's funny because, people will say, oh, like, what branch can I go to? To which I always say, well, when's the last time you've been to a branch, period? Like, oh, it's been a few years. Right. Like, most people aren't going to branches these days. But if you absolutely do need to go to a branch, we're part of a shared branch network. So there's over 5,000 participating credit union branches all across the country. And again, it's sort of this idea, of coming together, being a cooperative. So we share those resources so that we can serve the members of all of our credit unions better. And so you've got access to these 5,000 credit union branches. We have over 30,000 fee-free ATMs, so that if you need to withdraw cash, that's available. And then there's the mobile banking, which includes remote deposit capture. So, grandma sends you a check for your birthday, and you're like, what the heck do I do with a check in, the year 2024 or 2025? Well, you can, endorse it, take a picture of it, and boom, it's in your account. You're all good. You don't need to worry about it.
I love that you guys are able to accommodate the public, that you guys have the security that is need to be, especially the insurance with the 100,000 added on there, because as we spoke about this issue earlier with scams, they're out there, they keep getting better and better. However, I'm happy that you guys even educate the elders on that situation, because sometimes they get phone calls saying that they are with a bank and it's not good. Yeah. But nevertheless, I love that you guys educate the public on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the security thing now more than ever is huge. And, of course, like as believers, we know who wins in the end, but that doesn't change the inconvenience that a scammer can introduce into our life, just right here and now on earth. And so we do want to make sure that people understand what might be coming their way. But circling back to, this, yes, there are some hassles associated with changing banking. That would be true, if you were going from one big national bank to another, right? There's going to be, they kind of put you through the rigmarole. But when you think about what your money is doing, because your money is doing something, right? Again, your money's not just sitting in a vault somewhere, it's being deployed. So do you trust the people who are deploying your money? Do you trust them to make investments that are consistent with your values and ultimately build a world that you want to see, right? Because there's a very good chance that your bank or the bank of somebody out there is actively investing in things that go against everything that we hold dear, right? And then you wonder, oh my gosh, why are people who are opposed to faith, why are they so strong? Why do they have so much influence? Well, guess what? You may actually be partially funding them simply because of where you bank. And to give an example, and I hope this isn't too controversial, but when Roe v. Wade was overturned, several of the top banks issued these excited press releases saying, good news for any of our employees who live in a state where abortion is no longer legal, we will pay for you to fly to another state so that you can get an abortion. We'll pay for the abortion and we'll give you a week off.
And
so
it's heartbreaking in the sense because they don't offer counseling. They'll do all that, but they're not going to say, would you like to speak with a therapist and explain to this professional how did you get pregnant? Was it consensual? Because sometimes these young women are very young, 14, 15 years old. And then the other side is if there is an option for adoption, they don't really talk to these women about this. Also, they don't educate them about the possibilities of death during abortion. And so many people just always want to talk about abortion only being for medical necessities. But there's a lot of it that isn't, that they're usually using it for contraception and or any type of, I know it's a topic that's tough to speak about on a podcast, but I highly recommend to our audience to watch an episode we did with Abby Johnson. She is a whistleblower who was a nurse at Planned Parenthood, and she talks about everything that she witnessed, even selling, the babies to private laboratories. And it's a very sad but eye-opening episode that we have here on the Christian channel. So there you go. What you're saying is that you don't know where your money is being invested in. There's one thing to help the females and to protect them, but I feel like this is more of a financial situation when it comes to Planned Parenthood. It's more for them to profit, especially if they're selling to private labs.
When I'm like, where's the modern labor movement, right? So, Labor Day every year, we celebrate these accomplishments in the early 20th century when they were able to, now people only have to work 6 days a week instead of 7, and, they can only work this many hours a day, and, children don't have to go work in factories where they might, be injured or killed by machinery. So, we celebrate that to this day. But then you look at the decisions of some of these big companies, some of these big banks, and I mean, let's face it. I mean, I have 4 children, so I've seen, 4 pregnancies. 9 months is a long time, plus the 9 months in some ways is just the beginning. And so if an employer has an employee who's now pregnant, the employer's like, oh my gosh, like you're gonna stop working a month before you give birth, and then you're gonna take like 12 weeks after the birth. And then, as you're trying to juggle childcare, you might be out more often, versus if I could just pay you to have an abortion and give you a week off, we can just shut this thing down right now. And so I would say that, like, if people would just see it with the same eyes that they did, 100 years ago when they looked at how factory conditions affected workers, and recognized that at the end of the day, these companies that only exist for profit, they don't see people. They just see, extensions of the machinery that generate more money. And so if you are choosing to do business with an organization that sees its employees in that way and goes to those lengths to keep them at work, keep them chained to their desk so they can keep producing whatever it is that company produces, I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say you're complicit, but I think when you consider that fact and then you look around and you say, well, there are all these things that I don't like going on in the world, Well, to what extent are you contributing to it, and how could you stop contributing to it? And if enough believers stopped contributing to it, at what point would these companies say, oh my gosh, because our position and our actions have been brought to light, and because people are choosing to no longer do business with us, and it's killing the bottom line, maybe we need to change our practices so that we can win those customers back. And we as believers can wield that influence, right? There are hundreds of millions of Christians in America, and I think sometimes we forget that, and we think it's just me, or it's just me and the 3 people in my small group. No, there are people all across the country who share your values, and if we found meaningful ways to come together and sort of consolidate that power, we could wield real influence in our culture and make real change.
There's an episode with Michael Francis that we've had here on the Christian Channel podcast where he speaks about that as well. That episode's very interesting because it's about him being a bad guy, then a good guy. It's kind of like Ephesians 24:42, where it speaks about renewal. Yeah. And it's interesting because he spoke about that. I encourage everyone who's watching and listening to check out that episode, Michael Francis, and then you'll understand why I brought this up. But he spoke a little bit about that. Also, unfortunately, some big banks are funding certain media companies, which is kind of killing the idea of the nuclear family. In the sense like, oh, you don't need to have a family, or you don't need to visit people on the holidays, or it's not holidays anymore, or it's not Christmas, they say Xmas. And it's just a whole, rabbit hole of a conversation we can get into, but it's really unfortunate. So if people would just kind of understand that bigger banks are kind of funding these ideas, and maybe they might not know that they are. Certain people, I'm sure a lot of good people, obviously there are good people that work there, but they just don't understand exactly how the money is really affecting our community because they just keep funding it in so many companies that really don't share the same values as a Christian would share with them.
That's an excellent point. And film financing is its own niche in the banking industry. And when a well-known director or producer comes to a bank and says, this is the plan, this is the cast, this is what we're going to do, and we think that we'll net this much at the box office, you'll have these banks that, again, they don't even care about what the story is, right? They're not thinking about the story. They're like, okay, I know this director. I've seen his or her track record, and we think that by investing in this film, we can make X% profit, right? So yes, absolutely. Here's the loan. Go make your film, and pay us back in a couple of years, right? And so that's where I think sometimes it could be easy to assume that these big banks or these big companies are actively engaged in destroying culture, like that's their goal. But in a lot of cases, it's just that they want to make money. And this is why I think, Jesus talking about the love of money is the root of all evil. Money is not the root of all evil, the love of money. And so when we love money so much that we're willing to invest in things that are bad, that are destructive and corrosive to culture and to family, right? We invest in those things simply because we love money and we want to make more of it. You might have a few bad actors. Like there may be directors who literally want to, bring down Western civilization, and they're like, I'm going to tell stories that are twisted and frankly evil because I want to deconstruct, this, that, or the other, right? But the money that supports the creation of that film is usually coming from people who don't even know what the word deconstruct means. Like that's not part of their vocabulary, but they're like, I've seen you make a lot of money with the films you've made. So yes, here you go. Here's the check. Good luck. And, let us know how it goes.
Yes, it's more just the return on investment and to see on who is going to make them the most money, unfortunately. But as you brought up earlier in our conversation, that if we were just to create a big community of people that just understand where their money is going when invested, because inflation is very real. There's nothing we can do about it. So our money today is very different in 20 years. So if you're able to invest in a bank like America's Christian Credit Union, where we're able to support like-minded individuals in our community, then there could be more opportunity for faith-based films, faith-based small businesses, and the list goes on with education and more. So I applaud you and your team for everything that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
For everyone that's watching the podcast, what would be the next step?
Well, we're online, so we'd love for people to come on over to americaschristiancu.com. And we're doing a promotion. It's a partnership with Every Life Diapers. And so right now, if you go to americaschristiancu.com/every and you open an account, everybody gets $100 in their new account who goes that path. And then I think this is super cool. We're donating a box of Every Life diapers to a pregnancy resource center. And this goes back to, something that you said earlier in terms of supporting women who find themselves pregnant and don't know what to do next. There are these amazing faith-based pregnancy resource centers that give them the whole truth, and not just, the information, but also the support. And so that's why we're excited to partner with Every Life and make sure that, listen, I've got 4 children. Okay, I can't count how many diapers we've gone through, right? And
Probably
so
4 a day.
It's insane. And so, we said we're just a financial institution, but if we can donate diapers to moms who are in a tough spot and need support, then yes, count us in. And so right now you go to americaschristiancu.com/every, you fill out the little form there, you get $100, and we will donate a box of diapers to a pregnancy resource center on your behalf in partnership with Every Life.
Beautiful. We have that listed here at the bottom of the screen as well. And so with that being said, what kind of promotions do you guys have at the moment?
Yeah, so we have an awesome high yield savings account. Right now it's at 5%. That could change. Obviously, the Fed is dropping rates, but right now it's 5%. And then we also have a new member certificate. And so for people who are looking to lock up their money for a little bit of a longer duration, it's a 12-month certificate at 4.75%, which is, again, as of our recording time, better than just about anything out there. And so for people, and I want to emphasize that changing your banking doesn't mean that you're sacrificing the quality of what you get. Coming from a big national bank to America's Christian Credit Union, you're going to get high returns, you're going to get awesome service, easy access, and your money's secure, but you also have the added comfort of knowing that your money is actively supporting kingdom growth.
Well, thank you so very much for being on the Christian Channel today and taking the time to speak to our audience about America's Christian Credit Union. For all of our viewers, the website is listed here at the bottom of the screen. I also encourage you to check out christianchannel.com and subscribe to our channel. Until next time, I'm Yanitza Munoz.